Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. My name is Devanin, and I am so glad that you decided to join me again on the day. I've got my homeboy Barry Bowen back with me again, and we are here to break all the religious tea down for you. And so, the last time I had you on the show, we were talking about all these different churches and everything. And when we left, we were going to do like a Lakewood follow up. And so, I know you've requested some information from the IRS. They refused to give it to you, so we're still waiting to get a lot of that. We did find out that they just started filing their 990 Ts back in like 2018. So basically, we're still waiting for information on them. But can you explain to everyone what a 990 T is?
The IRS requires nonprofit organizations that have $1,000 or more in unrelated business income to file this Form 990T. The income can be taxed, and there are certain loopholes to the tax. The weirdest loophole, in my opinion, is rental income. So if a church is renting a facility and then they use that property for an outside event and they get money for it, it's taxable income. If they own the building outright and do outside events there and are paid for it, it's not taxable. It's really weird how the system works. But regular nonprofits have to file a form called a 990, which is separate from the 990T. There are different versions of it. One's called a postcard 990. That's for organizations with, I believe, $50,000 or less in revenue. Then there is the 990 Easy form, which is for organizations with more than $50,000 to under, I think, $200,000. And anything more than that was the regular 990. And so regular 990, they will disclose this kind of information in it.
And so we shall see in the future, how transparent Lakewood gets. So far, we've been unable to obtain their true income, though there has been some articles published on like their spending, but not so much on the income breakdown. So we shall see as time goes on. Did you hear about over at the Potter's house the the sex ring scandal with Jake's daughter Cora?
Yes.
What are your thoughts? Because years ago, his son was caught up in some kind of sex shit too, and so now we're talking about TD Jake's son was caught up in some kind of sex bullshit too, and now as I understand it, the daughter Cora Jakes Coleman and her husband was apparently running them hoes. You know, what do you
I have a friend who's following it very closely behind the scenes, and she's like, and not in shock because she knows how corrupt some of these people can be. And there have been a number of sex predators in the church. It's a tragic thing. It really does happen. What happens is churches try to be a place where people are trusted and where parents can trust their children to be watched and not harmed. We know that in some cases that's not what happens. They do get harmed. Cora has, I believe, filed for divorce. I think she has. I haven't followed it that closely. I don't know what she knew and when she started knowing it, but often in the case of when these type of sex scandals happen in a church, they try to get the parents of victims to sign out of court agreements with confidentiality clauses. They try to buy their silence. So that's one of the main ways that churches that have tried to handle these scandals. Now, that's not illegal, by the way. What you're supposed to do is it's supposed to be reported to law enforcement. Pastors are considered mandatory reporters. So when you have a sex scandal in a church and you report it to the church staff, by law, they're supposed to contact law enforcement.
Well, the divorce is not going to absolve her of any guilt or clear her name or unmuddy her name or anything. It's too late for that.
Yeah, I attended a church years ago. There was a sex scandal, and it was tragic. I mean, I did not expect this person to do those kind of things, and he abused a young boy, and that was there were people that stopped attending church because of it. The police. So what happened is, in this case, the church cooperated with authorities, and they did not try to rehabilitate him, as in try to provide a new church job for him or anything like that. I mean, in my opinion, a sexual predator should never be hired by a church.
Well, the Catholic Church didn't get that memo. At least this church seemed like maybe they have some type of a soul. But I'd like to point out is that, these people who are doing this are not members of the LGBTQIA plus community, because these churches always trying to act like we're lurking around there trying to rape and molest their boys and everything like that. But when it actually comes out, it's men who are married to women, men who identify as straight, or in case of Miss Cora, she's female herself. And, if the tea is true, then honey, then she was in there doing the dip too, and fucking with these children. So we'll see what comes out in court.
As an investigator of televangelists and other religious organizations, we get all kinds of tips. And one of the things that I have learned is when a person has zero self control in the area of money, they usually have no self control in other areas of their lives, including their sexuality. We have seen a large number of televangelists that are bisexual. I'm not about to out a bunch of people, but there are tons of rumors, lots of them, and almost all of them are credible. There is one that I want to talk about, though. There is a televangelist now deceased who, in the 1990s, a TV network decided to do a TV expose on him. And I'll tell you who it is after I finish telling you the story. The TV network decided they wanted to launch an investigative 1-hour TV show, a competitor to 60 Minutes. And this would have been one of their first TV shows. And so they started investigating a televangelist, and he was involved sexually with a male judge. Yes, you heard that correct. This TV expose would have been a blockbuster. They had cameramen going into gay bars. There was employees of the organization going to gay bars. It was a wild story. But it was Oral Roberts, founder of Oral Roberts University, the famous healing evangelists of the 1950s and later. He was involved with a male judge.
None of this surprises me.
What happened was he had a health problem. I can't remember if it was a stroke, some type of a medical emergency, almost died. And this was right before the TV expose was scheduled to air. And what I think happened is they canceled the program. And I think it may have been induced by stress. He knew this expose was going to come out. But yeah, That's one of the wildest stories, but I mean, there are others that we've heard of. I mean, there are rumors about different televangelists committing rape. There's one case I know about that the records got sealed. I think that it's a protective order or something that so the results can't be disclosed. I can't drop a name or anything. But the allegations were absolutely horrendous.
Well, everyone just remember you don't really know your preachers. And for all the photo ops and all the social media visits, I remember I think when Joel and Victoria Osteen went to go visit Oral Roberts and it was this whole media production thing. What I always wonder is what do the televangelists talk about when they're around each other when the cameras turn off? Because whenever they're in front of a camera, they're at work. That is a version of them they're selling, no matter who they are. In all of television, it's the same thing. So I try to encourage people to remember that you don't know your preacher. You're not sitting down having dinner and you're doing cocaine or whatever the fuck it is you like to do with him. Like you don't really know what the fuck he does when he's not around you or who he really is. So Oral Roberts fucking the shit out of this judge. At least he had enough sense to go for power. you know, you know. And so there's none of this surprises me. And so, okay, I wanted to talk a lot today about the Bible translations industry. This is super duper important because so many people read the Bible and then they tailor their life off of what they perceive it to mean. Preachers try to control their congregations through the Bible. And so much, politicians, especially Republicans, try to make policy and everything based off of what they believe the Bible means. So much stuff revolves around the Bible. And so I wanted to get into the finances behind the Bible. It's a very interesting thing to me because the Bible, as we know, came from the Middle East. At some point, old King James decided he wanted to make an interpretation of it. There's a documentary on the Discovery Plus channel right now called The Book of Queer, where they go over queer people from history who we didn't know were queer. Abraham Lincoln, this certain Pharaoh, and King James himself of the King James Version. According to this documentary, he was a big old queer girl, and it didn't matter, what he put in there, but he was fucking around with boys too. So, of course, people from Europe come over here, start fucking with the indigenous people and whatever, and they bring their religion, their Catholicism or whatever the hell, they had. So now we're here in present day and this Bible is just everywhere, all over the world. And people don't really, in my opinion, treat it with respect like it actually came from the Middle East and that we're actually worshiping a God that was originally not our own. So this ownership of it seems like a bastardization of its value to me. Now, in a blog you wrote or something I found on your website, which will go in the show notes, I believe you said that there's an estimated $500 million per year in the Bible translation industry.
We reprinted an article from Ministry Watch. The author of the story is Warren Cole Smith. Warren Cole Smith has written for World Magazine. He's worked for the Colson Center. He's a very credible investigative reporter. He's written a book, Based Fraud. And so we've looked into organizations involved in publication of Bibles. He's done a very thorough dive into them. And so he wrote that $500 million annually is spent on revenue goes to these organizations involved in translating the Bible. But I want to go back a few centuries. Before the printing press, Bibles were handwritten. It would take a scribe a long time to handwrite the Bible. And when Gutenberg invented his printing press, he was able to speed up the process big time. A lot of people don't know this, but one of the first things he printed was indulgences for the Catholic Church. So people could buy their forgiveness, a way out of purgatory. So that was one of the first things he printed. The printing press allowed a lot more access to the scriptures. And before the printing press, before the printing press, people were generally oral learners. They learned by hearing. For example, in Islam, there are people that will memorize the entire Quran and word for word, they'll be able to memorize the entire thing. And often they will lead in prayers at the mosque. That was the way of preserving it from generation to generation is by knowing it by heart, by memorizing it. Uh, for Christianity, there's even a Bible verse that says faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. So again, throughout most history, people learn by hearing. It was with the printing press that allowed people to have access and reprint and study for themselves, and which is a huge development in the intellectual development of humankind. So in the England, there was a man named John Wycliffe. I believe he was in England. He decided to translate. No, it was ten. Decided to translate the Bible into English, and he was actually put to death for it. The Catholic Church had one translation, Latin Vulgate. I think Jerome was the name of the translator. So the Bible was originally written in Hebrew and Latin. Jesus spoke Aramaic. That was another language used in Israel. If you study languages, Greek is a very precise language. So we say the word love, well, they have multiple words for love. Philia for like a friendly type of love, agape love for pure type love, eros for erotic type love. So because of the preciseness of Greek, it's easy to translate certain things. So when the printing press happened, and Gutenberg did his first print run of the Bible, wealthy people in Europe were able to buy Bibles for the first time often. And other publishers started building their own printing presses and they started publishing the Bible as well. In some cases, there were crazy mistakes made. There was one Bible that when they did the printing plates, there was a mistake. And for like one of the 10 commandments, instead of saying thou shalt not, the word not was accidentally left out. I think it said thou shalt commit adultery. The publisher was arrested and imprisoned. So we started seeing the beginnings of the Bible publishing business in the late 1400s, I believe, or early 1500s. And eventually, there were organizations, missionary organizations started to try to make disciples around the world. In the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a Christian named William Wilberforce. He worked with the London Missionary Society and several other societies to do these type of projects. Then you start seeing America starting to play a big role in this area in the 1800s, especially the 1900s. The American Bible Society is, I believe, the largest organization. Them and Wycliffe Bible Translators are two of the biggest organizations in Bible translation, especially Wycliffe. And there is like a federation, a group of organizations that they work together. According to Warren's research, it costs approximately $30 million to complete a Bible translation. One of the problems is some of these languages, it's not so easy to do. You don't necessarily have a font for them, a typeface for them. So if you sit down at a computer, there are some languages that are oral only. So when they do a translation, it's an oral translation. They will use a microphone. They'll record verse by verse. But they're building databases that help speed up the process, and the the process is slowly moving forward. But because it's so they these Bible translators, sometimes when they're questioned about the effectiveness of their work, it's really hard for them to be able to answer in a forthright manner. When you're doing ministry, you want it to be effective. You want measurable results. And in the case of Bible publishers, a completed Bible translation is a key metric. Well, how many translations can you produce in a I believe there are approximately 700 languages waiting to be the scriptures waiting to be translated into them, or it's 700. No, sorry, it's 700 languages have been translated from Bible times till now. Sorry, got my figures wrong. It's a lot of work to be done, and I think people need to be held accountable. So when it comes to translating the scriptures, one of the things that Wycliffe Bible translators will do is they may send a missionary to an area so that they can learn the language. That's the first thing. You have to know a language before you can translate the Bible into the language. And the next problem is, what if they don't have words for certain things? Imagine an Indian tribe. Would they have a word for sword? Would they have a word for chariot? If they've never used chariots before, they would not have a word for it. Well, how would you translate that? Or is there several words that you could use to describe a cart pulled by a horse that would be used in warfare? I mean, so you're trying to figure out some things. There's a lot of mental work to it. The money often goes from one organization to another organization. So they will give grants to another organization to support a translation in another language. And how effective is the organization they're working with? Does that organization file a Form 990? Do they disclose it? When you look at these organizations, you can see what their salaries are. You can go to an FAA flight registry and look to see if they own any aircraft. If they own jets, it's typically not a good use of donor money. But I mean, there's a lot of key metrics to look at to try to figure out if an organization is being frugal with the money that's given to them.
Do you know who, like, if a certain person owns, say, like, the New Living Bible, or the Living Bible, or the New Living Translation, or the Word Bible, like all of those different versions that we have in English, does somebody own each of those?
I would say in some cases, companies do. Publishers would. Sometimes you can have a publisher that creates their own English language translation. So Zondervan, they are the copyright holder for the NIV, the New International Version. The King James is so old that copyright is expired. Anybody can print a King James Bible.
Because what I'm wondering is like, so say Zondervan, and I've seen their name, in NIV Bibles before, but I never knew what it meant till now. So are they making royalties off of this every time it's sold or downloaded that you know of?
Our website, Uverse, is one of the biggest ones. They have they've created a Bible app. So you can download a Bible app to your phone and it's free. Another popular new translation is the ESV, the English Standard Version, and thebible.org, I think, is their website. And you can actually listen to it or read it on their website for free without even buying a print version. But in some cases, in the past, they would sell the Bible on DVD. There's one Bible that there's an oral version of it. It's read by famous actors. They read different chapters of the Bible. The way this works is sometimes it'll be an academic effort. You'll have translators from different colleges, Christian seminaries. These are professors. They're experts in biblical languages. So they've spent their life studying the Hebrew and Greek. And so they'll be put on a committee. And so they will work on a Bible translation. This is actually how the NIV was done. They had a committee, a working group that oversaw the translation. So, and then what happened was there was, I don't remember the guy's name, but you can actually look up a lot of these translations in Wikipedia, for example, and you can find out the history of that translation. But there was a guy that he used the King James, but did not like it. He did not like the old English, and he wanted a more modern, more current English version. And so he was the person that got the ball rolling on the NIV. For college students working on getting a PhD, becoming a doctorate, getting a doctorate degree, sometimes they study biblical languages, and if they work on a Bible translation, that looks great on their resume. So
Hmm.
they often do the work.
I wonder who, like, well, even in modern day times, when these people are sitting down to translate the Bible, are they making sure that there's proper representation, that you have people of all races, all ethnic backgrounds, all sexual orientation backgrounds? My feeling is that's not quite the case because, when I read through so many different Bible translations and stuff like that, it's like I don't really just like you were saying, like there's not some word that exists, like from Aramaic that translates, to English. But though that's the same for even like current, like how can I say this? Like contemporary languages. So like whenever I'm in Japan, my friend lives over there and sometimes I go over there to visit her and everything. And I'll be like, well, how do you say this? And she'll go like, well, we don't say that over here. That's just not a part of our culture. That's just not what we do. And so and that's for a nation that's currently like alive right now. And so what her point to me is like, don't think just because you do this in America that they do that everywhere else all over the globe, because it may not be a part of their culture. And so I feel like there is a cultural lack when it comes to biblical interpretation because not everybody is at the table. So if you have a whole room full of white conservative people, interpreting the Bible, then I feel like that's the reason why we have, women feeling discredited from the way they're described in the Bible, and and other races just are completely, left out and omitted and things like that. But do you know anything about at these organizations actually who is in there doing it and if there's like true diversity?
I haven't done a thorough study of that. Bible translations were generally done by conservative believers, people that I don't want to say they had an agenda. Th- Their goal was to make the Bible available so that the people could know it better, could learn the language, could learn what the Bible had to say in their own language. So in the Catholic Church, they used a Latin version of the Bible. That was why their masses were spoken in Latin. And it was done that way in the Catholic Church for centuries. So during the Reformation period, you had a number of people try to translate the Bible into other languages, making it a language of the people. And some cases, it'd be one person doing the translation work. It wasn't a committee. John Wycliffe, Tyndale, Martin Luther, primarily I did their Bible translation work alone, I believe.
Mm,
Uh, Things have obviously changed. But even in the 1900s, there have been a couple of guys that have done basically one person has authored Bible translation or transcript, or not transcript, a paraphrase. For example, the Living Bible is a paraphrase. So a paraphrase is taking reading a verse and basically putting it into your own words. That's a paraphrase. When it comes to translations, there is a word for word and there's thought for thought. A word for word, you read one word and you try to translate it into one word, the closest that would translate to that. And a thought for thought, you try to take thought represented and put it into the same thought. Give me an example. In one verse in the Bible, Jesus said, "Ask and it shall be given you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened unto you." If you read that verse in the Greek, it has a verb tense that we don't really have. It's a continuous action. So when you read some modern translations of that verse, it says, "Keep on asking and it'll be given to you. Keep on seeking and you'll find. Keep on knocking and the door will be opened into you." So, I mean, that gives you an idea how a translation works. So, but getting back to your original question, the people doing these studies, I don't think they were really concerned a lot with diversity when they first started doing translation work. I think that would be a more recent development. There have been some women that have worked on Bible translations. Historically, it's been mostly men doing it, the work.
mhm. Well, what I'm thankful for is this, is that, knowledge is so much at our fingertips in this day and time that we can go online, we can get our own books, we can interpret as much of the original language of the Bible as we can find, for ourselves. And so it's as painstaking as that may be, and it is not easy because I do it myself. So I like to employ this whenever there's a scripture of contest, like say, like the clobber passages that the conservatives like to use to tell people in my community that we're going to burn in hell because we're not straight, or if there's a scripture someone's trying to use to justify slavery or the demeaning of women and stuff like that. And so, I don't go in through the painstaking task of trying to interpret Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic unless it's something that's like a big deal like that, and somebody's trying to act like, "Oh, I absolutely know what this scripture means, and there's no other way to look at it," and blah, 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 blah. And then I go in there myself and I come up with a different interpretation. And the whole point, the whole thing of that I get out of why we have so many of these different translations it's just so subjective. And my whole point of diving into this is to get people off of the dependency that we can develop. on any certain one translation, and for God's sakes, not a person's translation. So I wanted people to know there is actually a money trail behind this. And so I feel like that affects the way it's interpreted. And so people can draw their own conclusions. I'm a fan of interpreting it myself because at this point, I don't really trust what anyone has to say about the Bible. I just want to know for myself. And when we're reading an interpretation, it's important to us to know that humans interpreted that, you know, and whatever English is printed in English is not the original text.
One of my favorite things is there's a website, Bible Hub, and they will take one verse and then show it in a bunch of different Bible translations. So you can, like Young's literal translation and King James and English Standard Version and the New Living Translation. So you can see the different word choices that are used. There are a lot of people that like to see how a favorite verse is translated into different script and it different uses different word choices. So for me, as a investigator of religious fraud, one of my favorite Bible verses is Second Peter 2, verse 3. In the King James Version, it's talking about these false teachers, and it says they will make merchandise of us, of people. Basically, the idea is they turn the church into a marketplace. That's what Jesus noticed when he went into the temple and threw out the money changers. They had turned it into a business, a marketplace. And you read that same verse in the New Living Translation. It's hilarious. It says, in their greed, they will make up clever lies to get hold of your money. The verses are worded very differently, but I agree 100% with both.
Well, that brings me to my next point. I wanted to talk about two things. These honorariums, as they call them, that preachers pay each other when they go to preach at different churches, and then the licensing of music. We'll start with the licensing of music. I personally, as a music writer, I kind of have a problem with the way this seems to be done in churches. So, like, so say if Hillsong Church is gonna create this album, they're gonna license it, and then in order for another church to use it, they're gonna sell it to them. Like, I think another church has to buy the rights and things like that to use this music. And so, from my perspective, if God gives me a song and this is all supposed to be, divinely inspired and everything like that, I feel bad about taking this song and saying, "Hey, you church, you can use my worship song, but you gotta pay me first." If now if it's a radio station, some sort of syndicated broadcast, that's different to me because that's not like a house of worship where people feel like they need to go. You're listening to the radio or whatever, you're streaming this on iTunes. I'm okay with that business model for worship music, but charging churches, to do it, I think that that's fucked up.
It is a business. So there's different kinds of rights. There's copyright, there's performance rights, there's broadcast rights. And there are companies that manage all these different kinds of rights. There have been churches sued for having performed songs for and didn't pay for appropriate license. This church has been sued. I mean, and so that's why it's become a business. I lost my train of thought for a moment. Okay, so I took a media law class in college. That was one of the things that we had to learn about was copyright. And copyright has an expiration date. It's changed over the years. So I believe now it's like expires a certain number of years after the original author dies. And if the person lives a very long life, it can expire at a long distance into the future. The There's an organization, Creative Commons, creativecommons.org is, I believe, their website. They wanted to um, create a movement for the allow of resharing of information. And so they created a number of licenses, and these are alternatives to regular copyright. So the way the US copyright law is written, if you write something, you're the original copyright holder. It can get complicated if you're hired by a church and you do what's called a work for hire, then the copyright can belong to the church. But for Creative Commons, they created a public domain license. This is a work would then be in the public domain. Anybody could use it for whatever purpose. You could take their lyrics or their music, rewrite it, remix it, whatever, and for free. There's no payments required. They have what's called an attribution license, where people can reuse your original content as long as they give attribution. And so this is often used by photographers, for example. They'll post their pictures online with the attribution license. Then you can use their photos to illustrate an article that you write, and you just credit the photographer. There are licenses that provide for share and share alike. There are some that are for non-commercial only use. So they give you a wide range of ways to work with content. And I believe that's a better model than what we're seeing right now. There's a guy named Carl Lentz, who I believe we discussed in a previous podcast. He was a preacher at Hillsong. His dad, Stephen Lentz, wrote a book, The Business of Church, and he wrote about copyright. And he suggested that a pastor could well, normally the church would own the copyright of a sermon. The pastor would be a work for hire, what he says. But what he said that you could also, a pastor could license their sermons to the church. And so I don't feel very good about that. I think when you start doing stuff like that, then preaching becomes about what can make the most money. What can you sell the most? And worship music has become big business. Nowadays, fewer people are buying albums. Well, actually, LPs have seen a big increase in sales. It's weird.
Okay, see
But
themselves.
albums, LPs, records have had a increase in sales. I think it's people nostalgia for old albums, collectors buying them on vinyl. But a lot of people would buy a song from iTunes or instead of an entire album. So records have become a big business, or gospel worship music become a big business in the church. Hillsong has made a lot of money. I believe they've sold 20 million albums. That's the sales I've seen for Hillsong.
I don't know. This it's something with this, like what you're saying with this merchandising and and everything like that. It seems so innocent. Oh, we're just gonna sell a few things, and the way they package it in church. Here, take this sermon home so you can listen to it again and again and still be blessed, and get this book, get this, get these conferences. I used to be a member of the Church of God in Christ, and I've reached out to the headquarters. I wanted to go overseas and do missions work and something like that, and it was the missions page on their and on the international headquarters website didn't have anything there. And so I emailed them. I got information. I think I got as far as to the gatekeeper for like the bishop, maybe, you know, of the whole head of the whole Church of God in Christ, and then they like just stopped responding because I couldn't, I wanted to go do missions. I think there was a way that they would fund it or something like that, but it didn't seem like they really wanted to do it. What they did have up to date though was their page that had all of their conferences coming up, the speakers and all of that. And I just thought that that was pretty shitty because I'm like, you're always sending these preachers here and there and raising this money. But when I'm trying to talk to you about philanthropy and humanitarian efforts that's going to cost you money, then the line went cold. And so, and there's a verse in the book of Revelation that has always stuck out to me. Is in Revelation chapter 18, and it starts around verse 10-ish. And this is talking about when they say Babylon the Great is fallen. There's all kinds of different interpretations of what they think Babylon means. Is it, this or is it that? I think Babylon stands for a great many forms of corruption of humanity. But I'm just going to read this anyway. And it says, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is your judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buys their merchandise anymore, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all Thyine wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble and cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense and wine and oil and fine flour and wheat and beasts and sheep and horses and chariots and slaves and souls of men." And I just thought it was very interesting after listing this really, really, really long list of material things that it ends on like humanitarian issues and the destruction of people. So, as we're talking about all of this buying and trading and selling in the temple, I personally feel like from the churches to like a lot of these social media companies and things like that, in their haste to make money and in their greed and stuff like that, they're sacrificing people in the process. And I think that this verse is talking that these verses that I just read are talking about that. But what do you think about what I just read?
There is different ways of interpreting the book of Revelation. It's very fascinating. So it deals with end times. The word for that is eschatology, study the end times. And basically, the Bible teaches that wickedness is going to abound, that people's hearts grow cold because of wickedness, lawlessness of people, and because of hypocrisy. And because of that, God will eventually pour out his wrath upon mankind. And there will be punishment for sin. And people have made commerce an idol. They've made the entertainment industry an idol, social media an idol, all these kind of things, idols they put ahead of God. And things that they hold dear have become idols, and they will see their idols destroyed. That's one of the ways that I see that passage. The experience that you had with Kojic, with the conferences, I actually wrote an article about these conference businesses, the speaking fees of honorariums. And there's a legitimate need and opportunity for people to network. A conference can be a great place to network and meet people. I've gone to film festivals, for example. I had previously worked in the film industry years ago. And so going to a film festival, you meet lots of like-minded people, You meet writers, filmmakers, actors, actresses, people that want to get their start in the industry. And so uh, you meet people and develop friendships that way. And then you go see their movie when they have a movie coming out. And I know them. So it's a different experience than seeing a movie by nobody you know. And so I do enjoy the aspects of networking. I've been to conferences before, and that was my favorite part about it. But for the motive of the people throwing on the conference, what is their motive? And we know that, like, well, not this week, but the previous week. So this would have been around the end of July or beginning of August. My mind's a blank, gone. Kenneth Copeland had his conference. It's called the Southwest Believers Convention. And it was in Fort Worth, Texas. Televangelists like Jesse Duplantis would fly into Fort Worth to preach and then fly back to where he's from. And then the next day, fly right back to Fort Worth and then fly back to New Orleans. I don't think he likes to stay in hotels. Just theory I have. Why would a person make multiple trips to day after day? It's weird to me. Because those trips, those flights cost thousands of dollars. And but to put on a convention like that, you have to bring in a lot of money to pay for all those speakers. And if you're doing that, do you pay for their transportation? Do you pay for their jet to fly? I mean, that could have been $20,000, $40,000. I don't know. I'm guessing at a bare minimum, it costs $20,000 for all those flights. I mean, you have to pay for the fuel, you have to pay for the pilots, and that's just an unnecessary expense. The conference business, I think it's a lot of gamemanship. You speak at my conference and I'll speak at yours. So it's a way of self-promoting each other. I wrote an article about honorariums. It's on the Trinity Foundation website. And I I looked at 990s for nonprofit organizations. Sometimes they will disclose honorarium revenue. Sometimes they'll disclose honorarium expenses. So, for example, some pastors or ministry leaders, they speak at a location, but you have to pay them a speaking fee to their organization. So that's revenue to the organization. And so that's how that shows up. For honorarium expenses, sometimes like when you host a conference, you're paying an outside speaker and they list that on their statement of expenses page. There are organizations that will pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in honorariums. In the past, TBN did that. They have special guests for their megathons and for some of their Praise the Lord broadcasts. And so they would spend literally, I think in some cases, over $700,000 a year on speaking honorariums.
I know when I was at one church in Southern California, they had a speaker there. They already paid for her to come down. They decided they want her to stay for one more sermon, and they were like, "We'll give her $10,000 to preach again, for one more hour or whatever." And of course, she was like, "Yes, Lord," and everything like that. And the highest I saw them go was maybe like 30,000. Now we're talking about for one sermon for about an hour. You know, To me, that's exorbitant because it was us tithing, and paying for them. It's not like the preacher was doing that. So what you're saying is right. So these preachers have this whole brotherhood or whatever to include the sisters too. And they're like, okay, you got your church. I got mine. We're going to come speak at each other's churches and we're going to pay each other about 10 to 30,000 each. Right. Cool. And so now the people,
The craziest thing I've heard of is a seed twice sown. This is how I consider it a scam. The seed twice sown. Kenneth Copeland does this. You give him, he gives your ministry a donation and then you give him a donation. It's a seed twice sown. You're getting your money back in some cases.
Wait, say that again?
They call it a seed twice sown. You donate to one organization, and then that organization donates back to you.
Which organization? He's talking about his church?
Yeah, Eagle Mountain International Church. It's also known as Kenneth Copeland Ministries. But yeah, he does this seed twice sown thing. He gives donations to different organizations, and then they give him a donation.
I don't get it. So he's gonna do. So he's personally donating to another
His
church.
organization gives a donation. His church donates to an organization, and that donation, that organization donates back to him.
What's the point?
You get your money back. It looks great on, hey, we spent this amount of money on ministry, but you're getting your money back. That's what it looks like to me.
So Kenneth Cole Ministry is gonna donate $1,000 to feed the children or whatever, but then they're gonna also donate $1,000 back to Kenneth Cole Ministries.
Sometimes they may not donate the full amount, but I think it's a way for a bunch of organizations to put on a balance sheet or something that they can promote it. They can say, hey, our audited financial statement, we gave this amount of money to ministry.
Mm. Oh, so they're like scratching each other's backs in a way, and they're moving
Yeah.
money around to manipulate the tax system. Okay.
You give me the money and then I get it back. I mean, that's what it looks like. They'd probably object to the way that I describe it, but that's what it looks like to me. But that's what they call it, seed twice sown.
They probably rejected this whole podcast, not just this episode. There's the whole thing altogether. The people who raised me, they're like my evangelist Nelson, who I talk about a lot. You know, they when they traveled the country and the world preaching, and they always said that they never charge people to go. They were like, if God's going to send me over here or whatever, then he's also going to provide. Now I'm talking about people who were probably born in like the 20s, 1920s, 30s, 40s, that sort of thing. So these people were old. And so I think she was 80 when she died about 3, 4 years ago. And so you can do the math to see probably when she was born, but she never, she felt like God was calling her to Washington, D.C. to go preach, and she had a relationship with that church. As I understand it, we, might raise money to help her go, or she would pay for it herself or something like that. But she wasn't like, I ain't showing up unless you have this amount of money. It wasn't anything like that. Now they did once they would get there, if they wanted to raise a speaker's offering, then it's whatever that amount would be. It's not like it had to be a minimum for it to show up, for the speaker to show up. And so I feel like her style was more in line with how then the apostles started doing Jesus's ministry. They took what they had and went out and preached the word, and they kind of took care of these preachers when they got to different towns. I don't find anywhere in the scripture where go and preach the gospel, but only do it if you're paid a minimum amount of money. I don't.
That verse isn't there.
And so what this is the church being very hypocritical and wanting to look like the world. And so if it's something that the church doesn't want you to do, drink, masturbate, have sex outside of marriage, or generally enjoy your life, they're like, you don't want to be like the world. We can't have you being worldly, rah, 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 rah. But when it comes down to finances, they want to pattern themselves after Fortune 500 companies, and they want to pattern themselves after the world. They're like, why shouldn't we make it's the same thing as a corporate executive does? Why shouldn't we make the same thing every other speaker does? Just because we're in the church doesn't mean we shouldn't be paid, right? So then it's okay to be like the world.
Well, some of these preachers, I don't think they believe a word they preach. And I don't want to name names, but we have an informant that told us about a pastor that was an atheist. He didn't pray. And in fact, I just mentioned that in one of the articles that I posted this morning. I can't identify the preacher's name. He's definitely on our radar, but there's a preacher that he's an atheist, agnostic. He doesn't believe. What happened is I wrote an article about privacy laws preventing transparency. Trinity Foundation did a report on him to the IRS, and we're not able to know the status of that report because of the way the IRS laws are. But yeah, the preacher doesn't believe the Bible. It's just a scam to get money. He preaches the prosperity gospel, but he doesn't believe the Bible. Uh, and there are a number of preachers that I would put in the same category. Obviously, I can't read their minds. There's a guy named Mike Murdoch. I have serious doubts that he believes some of the stuff that he preaches. Tilton, Robert Tilton. I seriously doubt he believes some of the things that he said. Again, that's my own opinion, but some of the things they say don't look authentic to me, don't look real. And some of these people are the ones really pushing the prosperity gospel.
It's I've observed a pattern. Like when I was still in the church, they would do this thing and they would do like escalating offering amounts. So they would be like, they would get everyone all pumped up. I want you to give $100 and blah, 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 blah. Or perhaps de-escalating. It would go both ways. Sometimes they would make a whole big deal out of somebody who they would give 1,000 or 100. And then they'd go, okay, well, if you can't do that, then we'll take 80. Huge blessings coming your way, miracles and all of that. If not that, and we'll take 60, whatever. Then they'll work their way down to 20. You know, at first I thought maybe it was a legit thing, but then I noticed other preachers doing this at different churches, if I'm recalling correctly. So it's like they were borrowing best practices and then saying that it was divinely inspired every time they did it. And one time when I was at this church in Southern California, I went to go give like the last few dollars I had. It was like $3 or $4. I'm thinking I'm going to be like, the lady who gave the two mites or whatever and be honored. The preacher, he was like, I don't need this. This, you know,
Oh,
he like rejected my offering because it wasn't at his minimum. And so, because they have this
yikes.
mind, right? These preachers, they have this mindset that they're worth so much. They're like, I shouldn't, don't give me any less than $20. That seems to be the standard. And they were like, I don't want an offering if you're going to give me less than 20. And then they would turn around and try to prime us up and be like, if you have somebody out there who's broke, they'll even let them ride in your car. You don't want that rubbing off on you. If they don't, if there's somebody who's going to pull you down. And I'm like, well, Jesus wouldn't have told me to not give someone a ride because they don't make over 40,000 a year or 100,000 or whatever, you know.
I, did you see the news about the recent preacher that was allegedly robbed of him and his wife of jewelry worth $1 million?
It does sound vaguely familiar, but
Just recently, a couple weeks ago, this event happened on Sunday in New York City, and preacher looks like a con man. I mean, how does a pastor afford a Rolls Royce? I mean, you look in his Instagram videos, and he does some of these videos inside his car, and if you look on the headrest, they have the double R. That's the Rolls Royce symbol there. And you're like, okay, are you using church funds to pay for this lifestyle? The IRS has a standard for pay. It's called reasonableness. If something is not considered, if it's considered unreasonable, then it should be illegal, or you should be taxed extra for it. That's in regards to nonprofit salaries, and churches are nonprofit.
yeah, I'm looking at this guy now. Well, perhaps the Lord made it right. He robbed others. Now his ass got robbed. God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, you will reap. The Lord didn't tell me this was his karma. I'm just saying that I don't know. Seemed like with all that money, he might have had better security.
There's a person on the stage sitting in a chair or next to the stage, as I say. This person is sitting in a chair when this so-called robbery happens. And it's interesting watching that person's mannerisms as he's watching this go down. He does not look scared to me anyway. And when I see that, I'm wondering, okay, is this insurance fraud? Is this actually a scam? I mean, that's what it looks like to me. I mean, obviously, I'm not a juror and I don't have any inside information, but it doesn't look legitimate to me. It doesn't look authentic.
Oh, so you think it's like a scam and he knew it was gonna happen.
Yes. Totally looks like a scam.
Oh, it has been done. It has been done. So knowing all these things we know about churches, people like you and I work to inform people so that they can be more aware of where they're spending their time, where they're spending their money, where they're investing their trust. People still are going to go to these churches no matter what we say. Some people might stop. So why is it that we fall for this prosperity gospel? Why do we keep going to these churches? I did it. I sat there listening to these people telling me things that I knew was bullshit. That preacher rejected my dollars that I wanted to give him, and I still kept going to that church. You know why? I know I started going to these churches because it was just really nice to hear a preacher being somewhat positive rather than growing up in the South where everything's a sin and you just can't do any fucking thing. So there was a lesser of two evils, but the person I am now, I'm like, you know what? I don't need any church at all. I know how to go to God for myself. So why do you think people still put themselves in front of this abuse, even with, all this knowledge that we're giving them?
When I was a teenager, we had an event one night with our youth group. It was a lock-in. And so in the midst of all these entertaining things that we did, games, etc., we had some Bible studies and etc. and discussion times. And we had a discussion about what did you want to become? What did you want to be in life? And as our group discussed that, sort of like became a thing, everybody wanted to be successful. And I think that's right at the heart of the prosperity gospel. People want to be validated. They want to be seen as a success. They do not want, they want to be self reliant. They don't want to depend on anyone for anything. So when a preacher preaches that you can get your heart's desire if you do this, you'll get well if you do this, your debt's paid if you do this. People sometimes are desperate, and it's sometimes the desperate people that are donating to prosperity gospel preachers. Often it's the poorest of the poor that donate to them. We know for a fact that there was one preacher that was deliberately send letters to people in low income zip codes. They give more than wealthy people. I mean, it's sad. Targeting the poorest of the poor. But that's what they do. And it's a white preacher targeting neighborhoods that are a lot of them are black. I call it racism. What he's doing. I believe it's absolutely evil how this is being done. And why do people keep doing it? Some are desperate. Some have bought into the prosperity gospel. They want to be rich. I think sometimes it's people they just haven't heard the truth and they don't they've because of that they accepted a lie. If they had a preacher instead of preaching the prosperity gospel would teach things like there's a Bible verse where Jesus said the poor will always be with you and say everybody be rich. If you had a preacher that was telling them a different message, I think some people would be more people would be open to it. But That's all they hear. And one of the verses that I mentioned earlier was the verse where ask and it shall be given you, seek and you shall find. Seeking is a big part of scripture. There's a Bible verse in the Old Testament where it says it's the glory of God to conceal a matter, the glory of kings to seek it out.
Mhm.
So God deliberately conceals the truth. He wants us to look for it. There's another verse in the Bible that says to study to show yourself approved unto man, so you can rightfully divide the word of truth. Basically, we need to study the word on our own. We can't rely on just someone to tell us everything. And so I think people have not been taught to seek the scriptures, to learn themselves. They've not been taught to do that.
No, not till now, because motherfuckers like you and I are preaching, autonomy to people. I want people to not only study the Bible, but to study these motherfucking preachers because, you're investing, like you're literally trusting your entire eternity and soul to this person on stage. You know, they have an entity to run. So no, they're not going to tell you to go follow God without them. They need you to keep coming back to the church. I don't have an agenda other than I want you to be spiritually fit and spiritually independent so that if those churches fall, if organized religion should fall, and you don't know what the hell is going to happen from one day to the next, you're not sitting there like in a spiritual limbo because you don't know what to do. You can't go to church. You can't do this. The saddest thing that I heard from the war in Ukraine was there was a Ukrainian lady who was fighting against the Russians. And she was like, I'm not afraid to die. I'm just afraid to die because I haven't had a chance to make it to confession. Like, that's too much control for the church to have over somebody's eternity for you to think that you can't even repent until you can go and talk to a physical human. There was no point in Jesus coming if it was going to be all that. And so I want people to study their leaders. Like we were talking about before we hopped on this broadcast, I want people to find out when all these teachers and preachers are running around these churches, when the hell were these people really called? Are they really called? How do you know that? There has to be some sort of a reason in the Bible. Lord, appears to people. There's a moment where they're not called. There's a moment where there is, something has to change. Was it a dream? Was it a vision? Don't just accept them because they're up on stage. And then we're wrapping up now. So after I say all this, I'm gonna let you say whatever you want to say and have a last word. I do not believe that just because somebody is the son of a preacher or they inherit a ministry, I don't subscribe to this whole everybody in the family is called. You know,
Agree.
God, I just don't because in the Bible, I don't see like many situations and I can't think of any right now where the mom, the dad, the aunts, the uncles, all the kids, everybody has a special mission from God. I don't see family ministries, you know, that span generations in these books. And so, and even kings, the bloodline of Abraham, it's different, you know. And then we're talking about even then, just the son was the leader and everything like that. And then even at that, he technically wasn't a priest, and so this whole everybody's called, I question it. And so what I'm seeing now is like these kids or these preachers are starting to preach. I saw one not too long ago, I'm not gonna say the preacher's name, but both parents are rich. Now he's starting to preach and he's talking about telling people, about being poor and how they're gonna make it, and the hard times and everything like that. And I'm all like, boy, what the fuck you know about hard times? I don't, especially financial hard times, So these children are preaching what they know people want to hear. But you have not lived on food stamps, Social Security, food insecurity, not knowing how you're going to keep the lights on. That is not a life you know because you were born a millionaire. And so now that you're a preacher's kid and you were born rich, you're going to get up there and speak this message that you can sell to your audience. I don't, I don't know. That just pisses me off.
My dad was a minister and he felt called of God to become a minister. It's not what he wanted to do. My dad wanted to be professional baseball player. He loved sports, but he ended up becoming a minister. His title was Minister of Education and Outreach. He worked in several Baptist churches over his career. And so in his job, he would train Bible teachers and recruit Bible teachers for the church. He would visit the hospitals each week. He would visit nursing homes each week. And he enjoyed serving people that they couldn't do anything for him. Going to see somebody that's sick in the hospital, seeing somebody in a nursing home that's weak and they can't go anywhere. He would bring joy to their lives. Some of these people, they wouldn't have any family members visiting them during the week. And just him going to see them, it made their day. And so that was the type of home I grew up in. One time there was a family, they moved to where we lived in Louisiana. He was job hunting the dad, the husband. They had a newborn child and they're broke, homeless. We let them live with us in our house for months, I think about 6 months. So we took in the homeless. That's what I believe real Christianity is about. It's about sacrifice, not success. It's about taking up your cross and following me. And that doesn't include a dollar bill and profits.
Yeah, that sounds super sincere, on his part. And he sounds like he was accessible to people and not like the big guy on stage, who we have to stand in line with. Maybe they'll sign our book, even though they're our pastor.
When our Sunday service would end Sunday morning, my dad almost always would try to be at the back door of the church. When people were leaving, he would greet people. So he would shake people's hands and say hi. He wanted to greet everybody. He wanted people to get to know who he was. And my dad loved visitation. He loved visiting people in their homes. That's, again, something that's going out of style. Fewer and fewer people are doing church visitation. Also, there's more and more of a mindset of my home as my castle. It's a place of privacy. And so you see less of that, of people inviting people into their homes. I think partly it's because of people like Jehovah's Witnesses going door to door. A lot of people don't like that. For example, Mormons doing that, I think it really turns people off. But my dad, he would visit people. We would have a church visitor card that when somebody visited, and if they wanted a visit, they could let us know. So there's a Bible verse where a chapter where it lists a number of these spiritual gifts. One of them is the gift of hospitality. I mean, there are people, when I was young, my mom would invite people over to eat with us on a Sunday afternoon after church. And we would get to know people. That was one of the things that my dad enjoyed doing. He wanted to get to know all the members of the church. Again, we were not in a mega church, but the church probably had 300 or 400 members, I'm guessing. So that's the thing. Real disciple makers really make themselves accessible to people.
I don't know.
And thank you for letting me on your podcast.
Oh, those were your last words?
Yes.
Well, you know what? That is good enough. So the way you describe that sound makes me feel all warm and tingly. Everybody out there, you're going to have to decide what works for you. Whatever happens, be sure that your most important time, the time that you spend with God, don't be like, well, I need to go to church to get a prayer through, or I need to go to church to feel God. No, just like any other relationship, your most important time is when you're alone. If you're dating someone, if you're married to someone, your most valuable time is not when you're in a theater full of people. So I don't think it's any different with the Lord. So just get close to God and he will reveal to you all truth in its time. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you all so much for taking time to listen to the Sex, Drugs, and Jesus podcast. It really means everything to me. Look, if you love the show, you can find more information and resources at sexdrugsandjesus.com or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Feel free to reach out to me directly at Devannon, sexdrugsandjesus.com, and on Twitter and Facebook as well. My name is Devannon, and it's been wonderful being your host today. And just remember that everything is going to be all right.